Thanks for listening to this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. I'm Sonia Rothwell, and I'm based in the heart of London's financial district at the UK office of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the unified voice of the AICPA and CIMA. Every week, we share insights from inside the accounting and finance professions that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever business you're in. In my work with the communications and content team here at the association, I get to talk to a lot of people about what's happening in the profession and what's about to happen. Everyone wants a crystal ball, but nobody's got one. So when you can't see the future, you can at least prepare for it. And a big part of that is getting the right strategy in place. Strategy, one word, many definitions, almost infinite possibilities. So where do you start? Well, this podcast is a good place. If you've listened to some of our older episodes, you'll already have heard the voice of Jennifer Gardner. During her time here at the association, she recorded a series of conversations and interviews with thought leaders and experts all about human intelligence, leadership, people, and the human skills that technology can't hope to replace, at least not yet. This week, we're sharing another of her library of interviews. It's a conversation with Sil Garaventa, a former lead manager for strategy here at the AICPA and CIMA, and now a director of sales support for US Foods in North Carolina. For a high-level overview of strategy, what it is, what makes it work, this conversation is a good place to start.
I'm Jennifer Gardner, and I'm joined by Sil Garaventa. Sil, can you start by defining strategy for our audience?
Sure, Jennifer. Thanks for having me. So as I think about strategy, it really comes down to one word. It's all about choice. And the word strategy is thrown around throughout business contexts so frequently that I think we often lose sight of what it really is. It's truly around making choices to do some things and not to do other things, and then building a business around those choices.
Right, because we can't do all things all the time.
Yeah, every company has resource limitations. And so we have to make choices around where we put our focus. And as essence, that's strategy.
And why is having a strategy important? I know we talked a little bit about you can't do all the things all the time, but what else is important about strategy?
Your strategy really defines how you put all the pieces of the business together. And as you look at how you position yourself in a market and where you have opportunities to grow, where you have opportunities to leverage your capabilities, how you expand to better serve your audience. The strategy really is around the choices that build that business. And so without a strategy, people in different departments will always be going different directions. They have their own set of priorities, but that strategy creates the synthesis and that true vision for everyone in the organization.
How do you determine your strategic priorities?
So every company has a different way of approaching strategic planning. For the most part, the companies that do it well take a data-driven, collaborative approach to strategy development. What I mean by that is they really involve everyone in the organization. So they're looking externally, they're looking internally, and all the people are providing input into how are we doing, how are we performing, where are we doing well, where are we struggling, but also what's happening in the market. And so what's happening with our competitors, what's happening with our market, how our customer needs changing. So all these different factors play into it. And that really develops kind of the foundation of your strategic plan, your fact base. From there, companies will often take different scenarios. So should we do this option? Should we do option B? And developing those different options then gives people the ability to think around, where should we put our focus? What happens if we do this? And in the end, those choices become the strategic plan.
So we're currently in a rapidly changing, often disrupted marketplace. Mm-hmm. What impact does that have on your strategic planning?
So if we think about strategic planning and how it's evolved over time, many companies took a longer term horizon 10, 15, 20 years ago, where you'd often see 3, 5, 10-year strategic plans because things took a lot longer to build capability, to get funding, to actually execute upon it. Now what we're seeing is that because things are changing so rapidly, that companies are trying to be more reactive and try to respond more quickly to the changing market needs. So what we're seeing is now this shift from static 3 to 5 year plans to companies scaling that back and having a shorter term planning horizon. Some companies looking at 1 year, 6 months, depending on the amount of disruption. But what's important, though, is that companies that are doing it well are having that balance, where they have that long-term vision for here's our strategy, here's where we're going to be in, say, 5 years, based on all the factors that are changing in the market. But on the short term, they know exactly what they're going to do over the next 6 to 12 months to try to get them there. And so it's that longer-term horizon for where we want to be, who we want to be when we get bigger, but also where are we right now? What are we focusing on?
What are some of the outside influences that are impacting companies' strategies right now?
The number one out there is technology. You talk about artificial intelligence. You're looking at blockchain in the accounting industry, cybersecurity risks. But most of the major factors right now are coming down to technology, but also the political environment. So we're seeing right now with manufacturing companies specifically, you see with what's happening with China and other places in the world, is that as trade is changing and more limitations are put on it, companies are having to shift where they put their manufacturing facilities, how they look at their supply chain. And so the political environment also plays a huge role right now in strategy development.
That makes sense. And I imagine that before we know it, the environment's going to play a bigger role in strategy as well.
In terms of sustainability, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And right now we're seeing a really big push for more transparency among companies around what's the footprint and how are they impacting the environment and how can we be better stewards of the world we live in. And you're seeing investors flooding into the market to invest in companies that are doing it right.
Right. And we've been seeing a lot in the news about the Green Bill and how that's impacting companies as well.
Absolutely.
So that would be an opportunity to be a little bit more agile with your strategy as that has an influence. So tell me a little bit about your process. What kind of research do you do?
So when we talk about research, I like to use the word of sensing. And so we like to say we develop a sensing capability where even though strategic planning happens within certain time horizons and usually is a precursor to budgeting, how you're allocating funds, the sensing capability is always on, where we are constantly getting inputs from our internal performance. We are constantly working with our customers, getting input on new offerings that we're putting out to market. And so the ability to pull in specific data points is really an ongoing process. And a big role that the strategy team plays in many companies is around maintaining that centralized insight intelligence to where that is always used as the foundation for building the next iteration of your strategy.
Who has the final say on strategy?
In every company, it's going to eventually be the CEO and the board. And so although many companies will have a strategy team or different people within separate functions will play a strategic role, eventually it goes down to your CEO, setting the direction, setting the vision for the organization. And within any good strategy, the CEO needs to own it, needs to set it, and needs to hold people accountable to going that direction.
And I bet he has to champion it too.
He or she needs a champion. Absolutely.
So when we think about these key stakeholders like your board and your CEO and maybe other people within your organization, do you have any tips for stakeholder management?
So the biggest one is to include them in the process, right? And so again, the CEO needs to be owning the strategy, needs to be highly involved in the planning process, but also you have a great board of directors in most companies that have insight from different industries and different experiences. And to be able to leverage those insights in your strategic planning process is invaluable. And that goes the same with the employees in your organization. So strategic planning should be a collaborative effort. It should not be done in a vacuum. It should not be done by certain individuals only. Really, every single person in the organization can and should be contributing to the insights. But then eventually you have your senior leaders and your CEO making the decisions.
As individuals, how can we develop our strategic mindset?
It's a good question. It's a good follow-up because I just said that everyone has to have a role, right? But strategy is hard. And although, many find it to be an exciting area to work in, it's hard because we have to say no to a lot of things. And that can come down to a personal level, right? Where we always want options. And the more options we see, that as good opportunity. But when you're talking strategy, it's about making choices to exclude some of those options at a given time. So one thing that we've done on a personal level to help our own strategic thinking is build out a personal strategic plan. And it might sound silly, but the idea here is as you think about your life, your career, whatever it might be, building out a strategy for where do you want to be in 3, 5, 10 years? And then what are you going to do over the next 6 to 12 months to help you get there? Your goal setting, your planning, right? And you can take in certain environmental factors for you as an individual. So how's the job market? How is your family life and how's that evolving? What's happening right now with your own personal capabilities? Do you need to go back to school for something? All these things can come into your own fact base for your life. Where do you want to go? What's your vision? But then how do you achieve that? Then it's holding yourself accountable to getting that done, right? So what choice are you going to make over the next 6 months that's going to help you get to your long-term vision? And the better we can get at owning our personal strategy, we can take that same thinking and translate it into the business.
Because you'd be practicing those skills of making choices and saying no.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to my next question about what skills are important for strategic leaders. Obviously, making choices, setting priorities, and saying no are all important. Are there other skills that strategic leaders should have?
Yeah, there's a probably broad answer here that could apply, but I would say the biggest one is ability to think critically, right? And have more of that owner's mindset of taking yourself from an individual and stepping up within a certain role and thinking about being the owner of that organization. And so that way you see all the different pieces come together. So it's that owner's mindset, a critical thinking skill, but then also the ability to listen and the skill of listening, being able to interview, to question, to be always curious and not think you have the answer, right? One of the challenges for us as strategists is you might sometimes have an idea and you think that's the answer. And quickly jumping to an answer will often lead you astray from what the data is telling you. And so how do you continue to be open to really thinking differently and not to try to come up with an immediate response?
What role does the strategy team play throughout the year at a company or an organization?
A few things that we've talked about. One is that sensing capability, gathering all the intelligence and understanding how market trends are affecting the business. So that's a function that really all teams play, but the strategy team can be at the center of that. Some strategy teams can also play a project management role, right? So they can be, once the strategy is in place, monitoring the performance of that strategy and saying, are we hitting the targets that we said we're going to hit? What were the assumptions that we built into that? And if we're not doing as well as we thought we were going to, why not? Right? So what are those assumptions? What's changed in the market? What do we need to adjust? And so there's that always sensing and monitoring piece. There's micro adjustments that need to happen throughout the year. The strategy team can help facilitate those dialogue. But then it's also, if there's any major change, how do we reset our longer term vision, or how do we reset our direction as a company? So it's engaging the senior leaders, it's gathering the intelligence and helping people make decisions.
How do you determine when it's time to make a change in your strategy?
It's really about if things are going well and if there's no major changes to your external environment, or if you're hitting all of your internal performance metrics, many times the best thing to do is to let it be, right? So we don't want to over change just to change. So if you have something that's being successful, continue to leverage that. It's usually though when you start to see signals that the customer's needs are changing or a competitor is doing something better, to where then you're starting to say, okay, can we truly be a leader in this space? Then you have to start to think about how do we change our approach and our direction. And we're seeing this now more frequently than ever, where new companies are able to come up from the ground as a startup and be now a multi-million-dollar company within a few years. And so now the ability to understand your environment, to understand where you partner and where you need to compete is really important.
Thinking about the strategy team a little bit further, and what kind of decisions around the organization does the strategy team influence?
I don't know if it's a strategy team necessarily, but if you talk about the strategy of the organization, the organization's strategy should influence every decision the company makes. And that goes from shaping the culture of the organization to what are the tactics that the marketing team is going to support over the next 6 months. If you think about the functional activities that happen in any company, the first thing they should be doing is looking to the organizational strategy and saying, how does this activity support our vision? How does this help achieve our goals? And that longer term horizon picture should shape our near term priorities.
So you don't just hand the strategy off and say, I'm going on vacation.
Well, that's a good point, right? There's a kind of a conventional thinking that many strategies get put in a binder and put on the shelf. And so that it's really important to not just develop a strategy and let it be. Part of the role of the strategy team and internal communications would be to make sure that you activate that strategy. Help employees, whether it's a new start or someone that's been there for 10 years, understand what is the company's strategy and how do they play a role. And so there's definitely a huge buy-in and communications element to any good strategy.
And what are some of the challenges with communicating the strategy throughout an organization?
There's a few. One is going to be that anytime you change a strategy, people are still holding on to the old strategy. Like, this is what we used to do. This is how we used to do it. But things might be changing and they might not understand why things are changing. So understanding and conveying the sense of purpose, that change, why we're doing what we're doing, is a really important element. The other is just that people may not agree with the strategy, right? So even though the CEO and the board and your leaders have all chosen to go a certain way, certain individuals might think that's not the right direction to go. And if that's the case, then there's a big change management effort that has to happen in order to get people bought in and help them understand why we're going a certain direction.
Tell us a little bit more about that change management process. I think, change management is something a lot of companies struggle with or have to think about more now in this rapidly changing environment. How do you work on that?
So part of it's repetition, right? It's first starting with your purpose. Why are we doing this? And I'm reemphasizing that on purpose, right? If we don't understand why we're doing something, we don't want to change. And so first, to be able to introduce something and to show the information that led up to the decision, to give examples of why we didn't go different routes. That helps provide more of a learning culture where companies can help their employees understand all the reasons why we're making decisions. And in the absence of that, people are only saying, well, we used to do this and now we're going and doing this and I don't get it or I disagree. So to be a more transparent company, to share the rationale why we're doing things, but also to have an ongoing conversation. So it's not here's a strategy and we're going to present it out and we're going to do a town hall. We're going to put it on some boards on the screen in the hallway and that's it. That's not it. That's purely just the start. So how do you have one-on-one dialogues? How do you put it to your line managers to make sure that they're helping their direct reports understand? How do you have ongoing trainings around the changing environment? So for instance, we do a webcast usually about every quarter that talks about each of our strategic initiatives, what's changed in the environment, how are we performing, and what we're going to do differently going forward. And so it's this ongoing dialogue with all staff to understand the big picture. And
they can see how what they're working on is contributing to the achievement of that strategic priority or that goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's hard in practice, right? And talking about it in theory with me and you, it's a very simple concept.
Right.
But to make it real and to get people bought in, it's a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you have hundreds or thousands of people that you're trying to get on board with a strategy.
Yep. And many companies, as they have global operations or different locations with different offices, mm-hmm. It creates even more of a challenge.
Great. Well, this was really helpful. I think that will give a great overview to people about strategy implementation, the value of purpose, and how to get started with their own strategies. Because not having a strategy really isn't a very good strategy.
Yeah, no strategy is not a strategy.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your information and your expertise on this topic.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Recorded towards the end of last year, that was Jennifer Gardner talking strategy with Sil Garaventa, now of US Foods. You can find plenty more on the topic of strategy on our website, and those links are in our show notes. To see the show notes, just click on this episode's info icon in the podcast app on your smartphone or tablet, or open the episode in your computer's web browser. You'll find everything you need right there. If you'd like to go a little deeper on the topic, there are 2 other websites I'd recommend that will help you stay ahead of the curve. AICPAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption and CGMAstore.com/GoBeyondDisruption. Go there for courses, webinars, and other professional development resources. It's a useful mix of free and paid for materials, so just go and have a look. Thanks again to our guests, and of course, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, go and tell someone about it. We'd love to know what you think and what you'd like to hear more of. Email us via the feedback link in our show notes. From London, I'm Sonia Rothwell. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time.
This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered, and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA or AICPA.org. It is provided with the understanding that the AICPA and AICPA.org are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional service. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA and AICPA.org make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.